Hey there, Joey here for School of Motion. In this lesson, we're gonna take a look at some of the basics of Xpresso in Cinema 4D. Xpresso is a very powerful tool that may not be the easiest thing to wrap your brain around at first, but once you get in there and you start to understand how to hook everything up, you'll have a very powerful new skill at your disposal that you can use to unleash some real power in Cinema 4D. Don't forget to sign up for a free student account so you can grab the project files from this lesson, as well as assets from any other lesson on the site. Now, let's hop into Cinema 4D and get going. So this is the finished version of the rig that I'm gonna post on my website. And if we click on the clock, I basically have all the parts of the clock under this Knoll here, and I have made some user data controls for the clock. And I'm going to show you guys how to do this in this tutorial. But let's just see what the clock does. I'm going to make this project 1,000 frames so we have a little running time here. And I'm just going to hit play and show you guys what happens. So the second hand is ticking. Every second it ticks one more tick. And you may barely be able to see that the minute hand is rotating slowly. Basically right now this clock is running in real time. And there are no keyframes here. This is all Xpresso. So if we click on the clock, we have some options here. We have the time multiplier, 1 equals real time. So right now this is set to 1. This clock will literally keep time. If you set it to the current time and you run Cinema 4D for a long time, it will tell you the time. So I can't imagine any scenario where you would actually want that in a motion graphics piece. So let's make that 100. All right, and now let's hit play again. And now it's going 100 times real time. So now you can see the minute hand is actually moving pretty quickly, and the hour hand is even starting to move. And I've actually added some options here to get rid of the jumpiness, the ticking of the second hand, so you could have it be a little bit smoother. And then I've even added a control to get rid of the visibility of the minute hand, of the second hand. In case you really want to crank up the speed here, let's say you needed some sort of, time-lapse clock. I mean, you can crank this number up as high as you want. And then there's some controls to set the starting hour, minute, and second of the clock before it starts running. And then this spline down here, this is actually, if I set this back to 1, this is actually the spline that controls the animation of the second hand. So this motion where it kind of springs forward and then jiggles a little bit, that's actually created by this spline. So Xpresso is extremely powerful. It is, I think, far more powerful than expressions in After Effects. And I'm going to show you guys how to build most of this rig, not all of it because it would take too long. So I have a copy of this clock with all of the rigging and Xpresso and everything taken off of it. So first of all, if you've never used Xpresso, let me try and explain what it is and how it works a little bit. So Xpresso is sort of the Cinema 4D version of expressions, and Cinema 4D has many, many ways to use code and sort of different ways besides keyframes to animate things. There's coffee, there's now Python, and then there's Xpresso, which is probably the simplest way of sort of creating behaviors and things like that. So in order to use Xpresso, you need to put an Xpresso tag on an object in Cinema. Now, one thing that is very different about Xpresso as opposed to After Effects is that the Xpresso itself, the nodes and behaviors you create, they don't actually have to be applied to the object that you want those behaviors to affect. What I mean by that is if I create a new null, and this is pretty common actually, a lot of designers do this, you could just call this null Xpresso, and this null doesn't do anything except hold an Xpresso tag. So I'm going to right click it, go to Cinema 4D tags, and add this Xpresso tag. And the first thing that happens is this Xpresso editor pops up with nothing in it. Okay, so now we're ready to add some Xpresso. So let me close this for a second. So within this Xpresso tag, I can actually affect any object that's in my scene anywhere. And this can be handy if you wanted to create one master control for your whole scene, and you had dozens of objects and they all needed to react to some controls that are manipulated within the Xpresso. You could put the Xpresso tag here, just edit it here, but actually control every object in your scene. Now, because my goal was to create a clock rig that you could just basically copy and paste this clock into your scene and use it, I actually want this tag on the clock. And the reason is, that way if you just, click on the clock and hit copy and paste, all of the Xpresso and control will come with it. If it was on this Xpresso Knoll, you'd have to copy both of these, and that just seems kind of silly. So in this case, it's better to have the tag right on the object. So now we have this tag, there's nothing in it. Now, what is this? It looks like graph paper. So the way Xpresso works is very different than expressions in After Effects. You don't generally type anything in. It's all done with nodes. And you can see what those nodes are by right-clicking in here. And if you go to New Node, there's some drop-down menus, and you can actually just kind of drill down, and all of these things that it's showing me are nodes you can add, okay? And the nodes do basically the same things that you can do in After Effects with expressions. They perform math, they do conversions between different types of numbers, they can store values, you can use them for if-then behavior, if this switches on, do this, if it's not, do this. And there's a lot of, you can obviously tell, there's a lot of things you can do. There's also options in here in this script menu to actually create nodes, where then you would go into the node and you would type in some code, and you can actually program and get some really, really complicated behavior with Xpresso. There's also a whole section for thinking particles, and that will be another tutorial for another time, because that is a very deep topic. But thinking particles actually are controlled entirely through Xpresso. So, getting the hang of Xpresso is really important to become a Cinema 4D artist. You can do a lot of things without it, but again, it's just like expressions. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So, the example of the clock. Let's get started here. So, if you haven't watched the Intro to After Effects expressions, then I'll just do a quick recap. We basically used a technique of mapping the time of the composition to the rotation of the hour and minute hand of the clock. We're going to do the exact same thing here, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I need a way of getting the time of this project. And just like there's a time variable in After Effects, there's a time node in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to right-click, New Node, and then in Xpresso General, way down here, there is a time node. Now, there are many, many nodes in Xpresso, and honestly, the best way I've found to discover new ones and to kind of come up with ways of using them is to watch tutorials like this, and then, just try and come up with challenges for yourself, things that are very tedious to do by keyframing, but you suspect could be done with Xpresso. And then go into the Cinema 4D help, go to the Xpresso section, and try and read through these nodes. I mean, they are called pretty intuitive things, and so most of the time you can just kind of figure it out. So this time node here is going to return the time of the comp. Now, let's say we don't know that if this is going to give us seconds or frames, we don't know. Let me just show you really fast. When you click any node in the Xpresso editor, the properties for that node show up down here. So if there's options that you can change, they'll show up in this little area. Now, this doesn't give us any options. So how do I know what this is actually spitting out? We're going to grab another node, New Node, Xpresso, General, and the one we're looking for is Result. Result is all it does is basically show you the values that are coming out of other nodes. And this is a good time to explain what these nodes, how they're sort of formatted. So the left side of a node, the blue side, is the input. So some nodes have inputs into them, like this result node, okay? It needs something inputted into this little blue dot in order to work. This node only has an output. All it does is compute the time of the project, and then it spits that value out of this red dot here. And in order to connect nodes together, you click the output of one node, and you get this little pick whip, and you will drag it to the input of another node. Now, Xpresso doesn't always update automatically. Sometimes you have to go backwards or forwards a frame. So I'm hitting G and F to go 1 frame forward, 1 frame back. And you can see now we're seeing the result from the time node. And it's clearly not in frames because we're at frame 11 and it's showing 0.458. But this project is most likely in 24 frames a second. So if we go to frame 24, we are now getting a 1. Okay? So we now know the time node is giving us seconds, not frames. And that's actually pretty useful if you're building a clock, because you want that clock to run at a constant speed regardless of the frame rate of your project. So that's actually pretty useful. All right, so now what do we want to do with this value? We want to map that to the rotation of these hands. So why don't we start with the second hand, and then we'll go to the minute hand and the hour hand, all right? So in order to affect the second hand, which is this red hand, all the hands are overlapping right now, which is why it looks funny. If you come into your object manager and you find the second hand, you can literally click and drag it into the Xpresso editor. And you'll see now we have a node for the second hand. So you can see the second hand right now, there's nothing, there's no values, there's nothing in here. We have to add everything manually that we want to control. Now, because we want to tell the second hand what its rotation should be, specifically the bank rotation. You can see if I change it here, the second hand rotates around. I want to find the input for bank rotation here. So again, inputs are on the left side here on the blue. So if you click this blue square, you have now some options, and you can look through here and pick a million different things about the second hand object that you can control with Xpresso. And what we are going to look at is the coordinate section, and we're going to go down to rotation. And just so you know, the difference between global position, global rotation, and position rotation is that when the object is parented to something else, the global rotation and position will give you the actual position in your entire project in 3D space, whereas the position and rotation will give you the position rotation relative to its parent. Now this it just so happens that the Knoll clock, which is the parent of these minute, second, hour hands, it's in exactly the same position as all these hands. So it's not really going to make a difference in this case if we use global or if we use just the standard position rotations. So I'm going to use rotation, and I am going to go down to rotation.B for bank. And so now if I move this result out of the way, so if I just take the output of the time node, pipe it to the input of the second hand into this rotation B, and I come over here and I hit play, it's going to play. All right. And you will notice, that it's actually rotating, not super fast, but faster than you might think, because you would assume that because over here in your attribute manager, if you click on the second hand, the rotation bank parameter is set to 157 degrees. However, we know by looking at the Xpresso that the number actually getting piped into this is 2.75. So why is 2.75 seconds turning into 157 degrees? Well, that is because, unfortunately, because it just makes it a little more complicated, even though you work in degrees when you're manually changing these values, in Xpresso, you're working in radians. And basically, a radian is a method of talking about degrees using pi. So pi is 180 degrees, 2 pi is 360 degrees. Fortunately, you don't really have to worry about that. What you do need to do is convert these radians into degrees, so you can work with them, and it'll be a little easier. All right. So what I want to do now is create a control for this clock to set the overall speed of the clock. Because, what if we want to go faster or slower than the time node is actually animating? So in order to create controls in Cinema, you use user data. So if I click on this clock and I come down here, you can see right now we have no user data. We have basic, coordinates, and object tabs, and that's it. If we go to the user data menu right here and click add user data, we now have the manage user data window open up. And this is where we can create controls, and there's a lot of options how to do that. So the first thing you do is name the control. So I thought about how I wanted to control this, and it seemed to me the easiest way to think about it would be how fast should our clock move relative to real time. So I'm going to call this the time multiplier. And then I gave myself a little hint saying 1 equals real time, so that if you want a clock that runs in real time, you would just set the value to 1. So then if you look down below this, it's asking for a data type. So you have a lot of different data types. Float is probably the most common. Float just means any number, really. And then the interface, you can have a float interface, which is essentially just a box like this, where you can type in a number or use these little arrows. There's also a float slider, which gives you this nice little slider interface. And I'm just going to use float for this. And then what units do we want to use? We're not working in percents here. We're going to use real numbers, and your options are real, percent, degree, and meter. And we're just going to use a real number because we just want to type in a 1 or a 2 or a 100 or something like that. So then what the step is, what increment do you want to move in? If I click the edit arrow here, this up or this down arrow, do I want it to go up by 1s, by 10s, or smaller? And I usually set this pretty small, like 0.01, so I have more control over it. And then there's options if you want to limit the minimum and the maximum. Now I want to limit the minimum to 0, but I don't want to limit the max. I want to make this clock go as fast as you could possibly want it to. And then you can set a default value, so the default value will be 1, and we hit OK. So now in our clock object, you have a user data tab with our data set up, and you can see we have a slider. It will go down to 0 and no further. It starts at 1 and it goes up, and you can just scrub it up like this. You can hold shift and go quicker, or you can actually come in and type in a value, and now you can use this to start to control some of the Xpresso. So if we leave this at 1 for now, we'll double click the Xpresso tag to bring this back up. So now we need a way to get access to this user data. So the way you do that is we click and drag the entire clock null into the Xpresso window, and that user data we're going to use to basically multiply with the time. So if we multiply 1 times time, then our second hand will run in real time. If we make it larger, it will go faster. So the user data is found in the outputs of the clock, because it's a value that we're getting to use somewhere else. So if you click on this red box and you go all the way down to the bottom, you can actually see the user data for that object, and there's our time multiplier. Okay, so so now we have two outputs, time and the time multiplier from our user data, and we want to multiply those two together to control the second hand. All right, so now we need to think about how fast that second hand needs to go each second, okay, so that it's actually moving the correct distance in real time. So here's where I had to think about this for a little bit. A circle, again, is 360 degrees. There are 60 seconds on the clock. So if you divide 360 by 60 seconds, that means each second is 6 degrees, okay? So if this time multiplier is set to 1, then I want this second hand to move 6 degrees each second, and that will be real time. So what I need to first do is multiply this time multiplier times 6, because I want to work in degrees when I'm creating this espresso. It's going to make it easier for me to think and do the math I need to do. So if I want to multiply this times 6, we're going to need to use a math node. So if we right click and do new node, Xpresso, calculate. This is where all of the math-based nodes are, and you come down to math. So now you have a math node. All right, and the math node does addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and it has this other mode called modulo, which is really interesting. We're going to talk about modulo a little bit later in the tutorial. So I want to multiply these two numbers together. So if I click on the add node and come down here to the attributes, I can change the function to multiply. All right, and then I can just drag the outputs of these two nodes to the inputs of this node. All right, so now we're multiplying 1 times the time. And actually, before we do that, I want to convert this into, I want to multiply this by 6 so we can convert this into degrees that we're going to be using. So let me move this time out of the way for a second. So if you have a math node and you only have one input, and I want to multiply this input times 6, you have two options. One is you can create a new node, and in general you can find it called a constant, and a constant will just return any number you tell it, and that's all it does. But you don't actually have to do that. You can click on the math node and go to parameter, and if you only have one of the inputs hooked up, then the other one can be typed in down here in the parameter. So I'm just going to type in 6. So now the output of this is going to be whatever our time multiplier is times 6. Okay, so right now it's 6. So I want to convert that into degrees, all right, because I want to basically take the number of seconds that have elapsed. So at 1 second, I want that second hand to have moved 6 degrees, and that's it. So the first thing I need to do, because now we know this is expecting radians, but we want to work in degrees because it's easier. I'm going to convert the output of this into degrees. So the way we do that is with a new node, Xpresso, calculate, degree. And the degree node actually has two modes, radians to degrees and degrees to radians, okay? So what we're going to have to end up doing is converting what we're working with here, which is going to be degrees, and at the end we're going to have to convert it to radians, okay? And I'm going to use this result node to kind of check our math as we go along, okay? So right now we are multiplying our time multiplier times 6. So the result is 6, okay? So 6 degrees per second. Now we need to multiply this result times time. So I'm going to copy this node. And a quick way to do it is to just hold command and drag it. And so now I can connect the output of the time and the output of this multiply here. And let's look at the result of that. Okay, so now every second we are multiplying times 6. Okay, so we're at 48 frames, which is 2 seconds, and this is 12. If I move to 72 frames, this is now 18. Okay, so we are now successfully making this number go up by 6 every second. So now if we convert that degree, because this is in degrees, if we convert that degree into radians, so again, here's the degree node. It's set to, right now it's set radians to degree, and we want degree to radian. So 18 degrees, convert that to radians, and pump that into the rotation of the second hand. All right, so now let's hit play and see what happens. All right, so you can see it's moving one little tick every second. You know, 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. So that is working exactly as we wanted. And just to test and make sure that this that our user data is working, we can now click on the clock, change this to 10. And so now it's moving 10 seconds every second. Okay? So now we've got the second hand wired up. It should be pretty easy to wire up the minute and the hour hands. Okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna branch off from this multiply node here. So if you think about, the second hand is moving 6 degrees every second in real time, if we're going in real time, okay? So, how many times slower does the minute hand move than the second hand? Well, it moves 60 times slower, right? This has to move 360 degrees for this to move 6 degrees, okay? So, what I want to do is make a new multiply node down here, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I think I'm going to take this multiply node here, and let me get a result node, because now, as you can see, it can get pretty confusing, and I want to make sure I don't lead you guys down the wrong path. Okay. So this right here, this is basically the degrees that our second hand is moving. So if we divide that by 60, then that would be the number of degrees that the minute hand needs to move. Okay? So so this multiply node can actually come over here. And I generally try to organize things left to right in order, because you can see that this is already starting to get a little bit confusing. And there's a few ways to organize yourself in Xpresso. One way, which might be wise right now, is to get an Xpresso node in the general section called remark. And all a remark does, it lets you type in a comment in the properties here. And you could just type in second hand. And it's just like a little sticky note for yourself. And then the other thing you could do is say, okay, which nodes are specifically for the second hand? Let's say these two are clearly for the second hand. So I'm going to label this remark and these two nodes, and I'm going to give them a different color. So all I did was click this title color box and made them all green. So it's just a little bit easier to see that way. Okay, so now, and one other thing you could do is come into the basic tab here and change the name of these Xpresso nodes. So I could call this branch here, and so I'm kind of leaving myself a little hint. As I get moving, I can click on these and see, okay, this is where I'm supposed to branch. You can also create remarks, and they only show up when you click on the node, but they can be helpful. All right, so now what we need to do is divide the result of this node here by 60. So I'm going to take this math node and I'm going to change it from multiply to divide. I'm going to take the input and connect it to the output of this. And then I don't need a second input. I can just come to parameter and type 60. So it's dividing the output of this by 60. And let's use the result node here to see. And it sure is working. And now we need to do the exact same thing with the second hand that we do with the second hand with the minute hand. So I'm actually going to copy this degree node here, because this is already set up to convert degrees to radians. Okay. And then I need to grab the minute hand, pull it down here, and grab the rotation bank, pipe it in, and now the minute hand is wired up too. All right, and you can see that as this makes a full revolution, the minute hand just moves one tick. All right, so just using some simple math here, we've got the second hand and we've got the minute hand all dialed in. And I'm going to make these two, the minute hand and this degree note, I'm going to make them different colors. And actually, this is also part of the minute hand. So I'm going to make them all a different color, make them a little easier. Okay, so now the only one we have left is the hour hand. And obviously that's going to work the same way. So let's pull the hour hand down here. And let's grab the rotation bank. Let's copy this degree note and pipe that in. All right, so if we say that, you know, a minute hand moves 60 times slower than a second hand, then the hour hand clearly moves 60 times slower than the minute hand. So really all we need to do is double up on this divide note here. So let's copy that and bring it over here. We'll spread these out a little bit. Trying to create something that will make sense when I look at this later. So I'm going to take the output from this divide node, put it into this divide node. And this divide is already set to divide by 60. So then we pipe output of that into this degrees to radians and into the hour hand. And let's change the color of these. Okay. And let's not do green because we've already done green. Cool. All right, so now let's check this. If we run this clock, it's going to be almost impossible to see the hour hand move at this speed. So I'm going to type in 100. So now the second hand is moving, you know, it's moving really, really fast. You can see the minute hand clearly moving, but in a 144 frame project, this minute hand only moves 10 minutes, so the hour hand still is not moving very fast. So why don't we change this to 1,000? Okay. All right, and you can see that this is not working, right? Which means I've done my math wrong. And the reason for that is because it's late and I'm a little stupid. Yeah, this divide node should not be set to 60. When a minute hand moves all the way around a clock, the hour hand does not move 6 degrees. The hour hand actually moves 1/12 of the way around. So as the minute hand does a full circle, the hour hand does 1/12 of a circle. What we really need to do is divide, instead of by 60, we need to divide by 12. So now let's look at that. All right, so now we're at 1 o'clock. It goes all the way around, and we're almost there. Let me make this project longer. It's going to be hard to check our clock otherwise. All right, so we're at 1 o'clock. Minute hand goes all the way around, and we're at 2 o'clock now. All right, so now this clock is wired up to run forever, all by itself. That is the basics of Xpresso right there. You know, you pull objects from your object manager into the Xpresso. You pick which inputs you want to work on, and then you can use other nodes and user controls that you make to affect things and to, you know, create one control, do some math with it, and work on 3 objects, you know, and make them all run at different speeds. So if all you wanted to do was learn some basics of Xpresso, you should stop watching this tutorial right now. If you want to see a little bit of how you can do some advanced stuff in Xpresso, then keep watching, because what I'm going to attempt to do is recreate the rig that I created, and this was kind of tricky. I decided, wouldn't it be cool if I could make the second hand actually tick like a real clock? And so I'm going to show you guys how I did that. So the first thing I need to do is set this back, the time multiplier back to 1. And let's go into the Xpresso and let's think about this for a second. So when, you know, right now the second hand moves at the right speed, okay? And I knew that it was going to be tricky to get it to tick. So the first thing I wanted to do was figure out how can I make this not move smoothly around, but basically just jump 1 second, you know, just every second jump instantly to the next tick mark on the clock. So I used the I'm gonna pull up another result node here so we can monitor this as we go through it. Okay, so we're gonna be working on the second hand up here. Okay, so right now, if you look at the output of this multiply node, this is telling us the degrees that the second hand are moving. Okay, and what I actually need is basically for this to stay 0 all the way until we get to frame 24 and then become 6 instantly, okay? So what I basically needed was a way to round this number in increments of 6. Now, there is no way to round a number in increments of 6. You can round a number in increments of 1. So what I thought might work is if I take this number here, divide it by 6. So now I'm working in increments of 1. I round that number and then I multiply the result times 6. It might do what I wanted. I don't know. I wish I could explain, why, like how I came up with that. I just basically bashed my head against my desk until it came out. And sometimes that's the only way. I wish I had better news for you guys. All right, so let's try that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new calculate math node. All right, and we are going to set that to divide. All right, so we're going to pipe in the output of this into the top, and then input 2 is going to be 6. So we're dividing by 6. So let's look at the result of that now, okay, and just make sure it's doing what we think. Okay, so now it starts at 0. At frame 24, instead of being 6, it's now 1. At frame 48, instead of being 12, it's now 2, okay? And you can see that now we've got, in between 1 and 2, you get all these decimal points. If we could round this number, basically chop those off, then we would have a number that's only changing every 24 frames. So what I was looking for, and I'd never used this before, but I was looking for a node that would round the number for me. And I maybe I didn't look hard enough, but I couldn't find an obvious one. But what I did find in this adapter section here is this universal node. And it takes an input and it spits out an output. And I thought maybe this is what I'm looking for, and maybe this will convert whatever you put into it into whatever the node is set to. So I changed the data type from real to integer. So that way, integers don't have decimal points. So let's pipe the output of this into this universal adapter, and then pipe that into the result. Let's check it. So we go to the beginning and we have 0, and then we get to frame 24 and it changes to 1. And in between it stays put. So now every 24 frames it switches. So that made me very happy. I did a little dance and clapped my hands a couple times. The next thing we need to do is take this and multiply it by 6. So we divided by 6, got rid of the decimals, multiply it back by 6 to get back to our original number. And by doing that, we've basically cut out all those intermediate numbers. So we're going to make a new node, Xpresso, calculate math. And we want to multiply this time. So we'll take the output of this universal adapter, pipe it into the input, set the other input to 6. Okay. And so now, let's look at the result just to check, but I think this is going to work. So at frame 0, the result is 0. And as we scrub through, it stays 0 until frame 24, and it jumps to 6. So now every second we are jumping 6 degrees. It's exactly what we want. All right, so what I'm going to do is take these two nodes here. All right, now you can see that right now the output way back here is being piped into this. And so what's cool is we did all this extra work over here to try stuff out, and see what the result's going to be. However, we still have our original setup working. And that's one of the great things about Xpresso is that you can try different ideas and pipe things up and then look at the result and see if it's working. And if it is, then you can just swap over and you've got a new setup. All right. So now let's play this. And there you go. You see now we have the second hand and it is ticking every second to another tick mark. Okay. Now that's pretty cool and you could stop right there, but I wanted to figure out how do we get this to actually tick like a real clock. All right. So this is where I got a little bit fancy. So I thought about what needs to happen in order to make the second hand tick. Well, basically what we've got now is every second we're adding 6 to the number of degrees. Now, in between those seconds, we need to slowly add between 0 and 6 degrees and basically cycle between 0 and 6 degrees and be able to control how fast we go from 0 to 6 degrees, okay? That probably made no sense when I just explained it, but watch what I'm talking about. So what I want to do is basically take the output of this here, okay? And I want to look at the result of that. So right now, and actually what I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to keep this result node, I'm going to make a copy of it, and I'm going to pipe into this. Okay, so what you can see is that the output back here, this is before we did all this trickery to remove the in-between numbers. This is showing us the original number, right? And then when it gets to 12, boom, this one switches to 12 too. So what I realized was that if you took this number here and subtracted this number here, it would always give you the number of degrees in between the real value and the sort of, staccato value. I'm not sure what you would call that, syncopated maybe. And so that number that it would give you would basically cycle between 0 and 6. And then it would loop over and over again, okay? And I said, well, what if I could take that looping 0 to 6 that we're getting by subtracting this result from this result and map that, in a way where we could control the speed of that number and then add the result back to this. So again, I'm sure that made no sense, but let's just do it and see what happens. So what I need to do is create another math node to subtract this from this, okay? Sorry, subtract this from this. So new node, Xpresso, calculate math. All right, and this is going to be a subtract node. So I want to subtract. I want to take this number and subtract this number. All right. And now you can see we're starting to get noodles all over the place, and sometimes that's unavoidable. I could try to keep this a little more manageable here, but I'm not going to worry about it for this. In the rig that I actually posted, I cleaned it up a little bit. So let's look at the result of this and see what we're getting, okay? So you can see at 0, both of these numbers are the same. So the result we're getting is 0, all right? As we increase in time and we get closer to 1 second, we approach 6 and then we jump back to 0. See? So we're just looping by subtracting the original number from this truncated number. We're going between 0 and 6 over and over and over again. So what can we do with that? Well, there is a very cool node in Xpresso. And if you use Xpresso a lot, you're going to use this over and over and over and over again, and it's called the range mapper. So if you go to calculate and find the range mapper, what the range mapper does, and there's an expression in After Effects very much like this, which I'll talk about in a later tutorial. What the range mapper does is it takes a number in the input and it outputs another number, and it gives you options how to map the input number to the output. So for example, if you made a slider that went from 0 to 100%, you could pipe that into the input here, and then the output could be set to go from 1 million to 2 million. So 0% would be 1 million, 100% would be 2 million. So it takes a range, of input numbers and it maps them to a range of output numbers. So what I want to do is map my 0 to 6 here. So I'm gonna pipe that into the input. I want to map this 0 to 6 to a different 0 to 6, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. I'm going to make another result node here, and I'm going to pipe it like this. And in the range mapper, you have to set a few things. So the type of data is real. That's correct. We're using real numbers. The input range and output range are user defined right now. So if we go into parameter, the input lower and upper, we're looking for numbers 0 to 6, and we're outputting numbers 0 to 6. Okay, so by default, our input and our output are the same. So if I step through this, you'll see these numbers are identical right now. Okay, now, just to show you guys an easy example of how this works, if I change this output upper to 20, then now this number changes, and what it's doing is it's looking for numbers 0 to 6, and it's sort of spreading out 0 to 20 along that range of 0 to 6. So it's just mapping a small range of numbers to a larger range of numbers. Now that's not what we want to do here. We actually want the same numbers to come out, 0 to 6, but we want them to come out at a different speed. And one of the things the range mapper lets you do is set up a spline here, and the spline will control the rate at which the input becomes the output. So if I right click in here, in this spline area, and I go to spline presets linear. So a linear spline is the default. This just means there's a 1-to-1 relationship. When the input is 1, the output will be 1, okay? So if we go back right here, the input of this range mapper is 5. The output is also 5. If I go into this spline though, and I add a point here, and I move this, you can see now the input's 5, but the output is 3.22. So, but if we go to the ending, if we get towards the end, and we never actually hit 6 because the number turns over, but you can see that it does start to accelerate and it gets closer and closer to the original numbers. So what we could do is use this spline and basically draw a shape that's going to add on to our truncated number of degrees a little bit of animation. So if we look at this result now, this should be pretty interesting. So we have our range mapper here, and I've basically created a point in the middle and dragged it all the way to the bottom. And this is saying when the input is 0 to probably all the way about 4 or 5, the output is going to remain 0. And then at the very end, it's going to shoot up and go from 0 to 6 really quickly, okay? And if we step through this frame by frame, you can see the result. The input of this range mapper is 1.25. The output is still 0. And it's going to stay 0 until we get very close to the end. And then it's going to shoot up really quickly. So now we have... This is basically the tick animation, and this is the truncated degree that is basically just jumping 6 degrees every second. If we added this and this, then we would have a ticking animation. All right, so let me get rid of all these result nodes because they're getting a little confusing. Let me add a new math node. All right, and I'm going to set it to add. It's already set to that. And all I need to do now is add this range mapper to this multiply node. Okay. And now I'm going to disconnect these two nodes and move them way out here. And pipe the output into this. And let's have a look at what we have. Okay. So you can see now by adding the jerky movement with the sort of sped up only at the tail end of the animation, tick movement, we now have a ticking clock. Now, what I thought was cool was that I could actually, it's kind of a pain if I want to change that spline to have to go in here, find the range mapper, go to parameter and change the spline. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could make a control right on this clock? It turns out you can. If you go into user data and say manage user data, since we already have some, you can just say manage. And you can see we have our time multiplier here. You can hit add data. All right, so we're going to call this second hand spline. And actually, I want to show you guys another cool feature before I do that. Let's go back into user data, manage user data. Because I knew I was going to have multiple controls for the second hand, including whether it's visible or not, whether it ticks or not, and things like that. I wanted to basically group all of those settings together, so you can actually add a group and call that group whatever you want. You can call it second hand, and then in that group you can add data. And you can see there's a little arrow here, and now the data is underneath the second hand group. So we can just call this spline. The data type is going to be a spline. And the default value, I can right click in here and set the default to a linear spline. Hit OK. And so now in our user data, we have our time multiplier. We also have a little subsection here for second hand that you can open up and see the spline. So now I can actually click on this range mapper and click on this blue box, and you can add inputs to the range mapper. So you can actually add an input for the spline on that range mapper. And now this is where Xpresso can get a little confusing. So the user data I want to pipe into this is way over here on this clock, right? If I go way down here, user data, secondhand spline, that's what I want to pipe in. I don't really want a noodle going all the way across all these nodes. So in this case, I'm actually just going to drag another copy of my clock object. So I can, and you can have multiple copies of objects in Xpresso as long as you're not piping different values into the same inputs. So let's click on the output, user data, secondhand spline, and there's a lot of options under spline, but we just want the base one, spline. And I'm just going to connect the output of the spline to the input of the spline here. So now I can actually adjust the spline right here, right on the clock object. So if I add a point here and go like this, and then what I did for the rig was I selected those 2 points, right-clicked, and set the point types to easy ease. And that way I get Bezier handles. And to make this even easier to edit, you can right-click this and hit Show in Separate Window. And now you can actually make this window bigger and drag around and make this spline do whatever you want. So if we play this, you can see now you've got a little bit more of a natural movement. And I actually added a few more points to this curve in the rig so that I could get it to kind of overshoot, and then kind of correct itself. Which is what it's kind of doing now. So you can draw this spline any way you want, and that's how that second hand's going to animate. Woo! All right, another long tutorial. So that is the basics of Xpresso. There's some other things I did in my rig, but I think with what I've given you guys, you should be able to start playing around and figuring stuff out on your own. Again, I'm going to put this whole clock rig up with a few more options and bells and whistles and some explanatory remarks in the Xpresso Manager. I'm going to put that up at schoolofmotion.com, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you guys, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new about Cinema 4D that maybe you've never seen before. Of course, this lesson was just the very basics of what you can do with Xpresso, but hopefully now you'll be able to start tinkering with this very powerful node-based system on your own to do some cool stuff in your own projects. If you have any questions or thoughts, let us know, and don't forget to sign up for a free student account to access the project files from the lesson that you just watched, plus a whole bunch of other amazing stuff. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.